Actors, we've all got issues, so let's talk about them. I'm your host, Juan Ayala, and this is Actors with Issues. In today's episode, we speak with voiceover actor and anime star Adam McArthur. This interview was recorded on June 23rd, prior to the SAG-AFTRA strike. Adam McArthur, thanks for being on Actors with Issues. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. So when you first got started, was voiceover always on your radar, or was more theater sort of what you were going for, or on-camera work? What was it all like sort of in the beginning?
It was kind of everything. I started acting when I was a kid, and I don't think I really had an awareness of like all the different things that you could do.
Mm.
I watched movie. I grew up in the '80s, so I watched. I was like right at the age where I was starting to think about acting when movies like Home Alone were coming out. Which I was obsessed with. Three Ninjas was another one of my like
Mm.
favorites. And then because I grew up in the 80s, I watched shows like Ninja Turtles and G.I. Joe and Transformers, and then later on Power Rangers. So I kind of just wanted to do like all of what I was seeing. I'm like, someone's doing this. I want to do that. But I've always loved cartoons. So voiceover has definitely been something that I quickly realized that I wanted to, you know, have some focus on. So yeah.
Lots of actors when they're starting out, they may be interested in voiceover, but it's very much one of those areas of the industry. Mind you, the whole industry is like this, but it's that catch 22. It's like in order, you need a reel to submit or to audition, but you can't really compile a reel without credits. So it's like that vicious cycle. So,
Right.
for any young actors who are listening who want to get into voiceover, what advice do you have for them to get started?
I think it all goes back to acting, like being a good actor.
Mhm.
The way I got my start was I took an acting class. I had begged my parents to put me in an acting class, and then I finally got like a 4-week acting class for Christmas one year. And my first audition and my first booking came through that class. The teacher like needed some young teen boy voices, so I was a young teen boy at the time. And so I ended up getting it. So I would say get in an acting class if you want, no matter what kind of an actor you want to be. Just get in an acting class. That's going to be the first thing that really helps. And then being around it. So
Mhm.
again, like if you take a voiceover specific acting class, like you're going to meet other people who are doing it, who other, you never know who you're going to meet in terms of like connections and help for here and there. So just like being in it and around it is really helpful. The great thing about these days is it doesn't have to be in person either. A lot of stuff happens on Zoom. A lot of stuff happens on social media. So just kind of immersing yourself in the industry, you can learn a lot just by reading. So I think being around it and being around people who are doing it and doing it at a level that you want to be doing it at, it's good to kind of like, look at what they're saying and doing and stuff.
And with the very extensive resume that you have, you've done animation, anime, video games, major franchises like Final Fantasy and Star Wars. And I'm curious, is there any type of project or maybe sort of like a subgenre that you haven't had the chance to dive into that's on your
Ooh.
bucket list?
I would love to do like a network adult animated series, something like
Mhm.
a la like Family Guy or one of the more like for an older audience kind of show. I think that would be really fun. I've gotten to work on The Simpsons a couple of times. So
Mhm.
dang it. Well, yeah, I've done a little bit of stuff on The Simpsons, but never like a named character. It's always kind of like background stuff, which is still great. It's a fantastic way to make a living. But yeah, maybe when an adult animated series, something like Archer or something like that would be really fun.
And diving into the issues, given the name of our show, Actors with Issues,
Hmm.
we always like to shed some light on sort of career obstacles, struggles that folks have been through that maybe can help some of the actors who are listening. So, what comes to mind as sort of a career obstacle or a hurdle that you've overcome in your career?
Yeah, I think as with many actors, self-sabotage,
Mm.
self-doubt, imposter syndrome, all that stuff is always alive and well. I've done martial arts my whole life, and my teacher has sort of ingrained this idea in me that someone has to book these jobs, so it might as well be you. He
Mm.
says the last thing he said to me before I moved to Los Angeles in like the early 2000s. And I really hold on to that sometimes when it gets tough. We all have self-doubt. I've had conversations with actors who have been on shows on ABC for 9 years, who were on animated shows here and there. And at the end of every show that they're on, like when it's coming to an end, they're like, I don't know if I'll ever work again. And I'm like, when I have those kind of conversations, I'm like, if someone like that who is doing, for all intents and purposes, like everything any actor would dream of is still having those thoughts, that just kind of means we're all having those thoughts, which if we're all having those thoughts, it kind of means they're not really, like, we can just push them to the side, you know?
Yeah.
They're not really an issue. So yeah, self-doubt, self-sabotage, imposter syndrome, it's alive and well. You just got to remember you can do it, you know, and someone has to, so it might as well be you.
That was a big thing that we've sort of uncovered throughout the show. We started our podcast at the pretty much at the very beginning of the pandemic, May of
Mm,
2020, and throughout all of that time, almost 200 people have been on the show, and that's
amazing.
such a common thread of sort of you know no matter what stage in your career you're in, you almost always have those little seeds of doubt in your mind, and that hunger for, okay, what's next? Now what? Um,
Yeah.
one, and I'm sure my listeners have been like, this is going to bring up the story again, but this one actress, Bettina Miller, Tony Award winner on Broadway. She's in a ton of television.
Hmm.
She's number one on a show for Stars now and has been for a few seasons. And I interviewed her for season one, and she had said that even though she has a Tony Award, another Tony nomination, had been on a network show for like 6 years, she's number one now, but still had those thoughts of like, okay, well, what if this is it? What if it's just one season? What's next? What can I do? Do I go back to Broadway to do more TV, do
Yeah.
film? And it's like, wow, if someone with a Tony Award, like the pinnacle
Yeah.
of theater,
Yeah.
has those feelings and those thoughts, it's like, okay, so we're all just kind of on the same boat.
Yeah, totally. I think you know, when you start off as an actor, you have this kind of hustle mentality. You have to work
Yeah.
really hard. You have to be scrappy. You got to fight for everything. And when you start having stuff, you're like, wait, this can't be right. Like I'm not used to having that, you know? And then it takes a long time to get out of that. So I know it might sound weird, but I think, you know, when you get to a certain point in your career as an actor, the challenge is not so much like how do I find work or where do I get it next? It's being happy with what you have so
Mm.
that you're not just continually chasing the next thing because that you will not be happy if that's what you're doing. You have to look around and say thank you. I'm very much a goals driven, goal oriented person. You do this and you achieve this. Like that's how I was raised. And I think I've had many conversations with fellow actors about goals. Like, oh, what are your goals for this year? And I've always been that person. Make the list, have it hanging up, check them off when they come. The ones that don't hit, you know, put them on next year's list. And people have said like, "Oh, what are your goals now?" And you know, my goals have shifted. It's you know, even though you asked the question like, "Oh, what's like a bucket list thing?" Even that is like I'm searching for it a little bit. I think now the goal is to just be really present and grateful when I get to work with the people that I'm working with. It's less about the projects for me, and it's more about the people, and just building friendships and relationships with those that I'm working for and with, and then just finding happiness, like being happy that I'm here at all, you know?
And I'm
So.
curious, with the amount of time you've been in the industry, how, like, are there any misconceptions that come to mind, like things that maybe the sort of general audience member or a young actor might think about the entertainment industry that you've discovered is completely untrue, sort of like an urban myth?
I mean, one that kind of doesn't really matter that much would be that voice actors all work in their pajamas, which is totally not true. We are working professionals who you know, wear proper clothing.
Yeah.
So that's one. Uh, but I would say another sort of like myth that I wish I had known earlier was this myth of it's all about who you know. Because it's always phrased in a way that sounds like that, where it's kind of schmarmy and slimy, and it's all about, you know, who you can use to get you to the
Yeah.
top and all this stuff. And it's not, it is that, but it's not that at all. What it is, this idea of networking and building out people that you know is about building friendships. It's about making friends. It's about being a good person and not asking what someone else can do for you, but identifying how you can help someone else
Mhm.
and doing it for no other reason than it is good to help other people. because that's going to bridge a lot of gaps in terms of networking. You're going to help someone else, and then they won't forget that. Then down the road, it might not pay off for 10, 15 years. It might not ever pay off, and that's okay. But people don't forget when you help them. It's a rule that I learned in improv. The best thing you can do, especially when you're nervous, and I do this even in my jobs now that are scripted. The best thing you can do is when you go in is you make the people who you are in there with look as good as possible. It takes all the focus off you. You're not worried about, oh, am I making a good impression? Am I doing a good job? No, you do whatever you can to make sure your castmates look good, your the voice directors look good, whoever it is. And it's the same thing with your friends and with your networking and all that. You do whatever you can to help those other people. You're going to build this amazing network, and then all of a sudden you're gonna look around and you're gonna be like, wow, I have all I need because I invested that time in other people. So yeah, networking is actually amazing, and it's so much better than it's made out to be. So yeah.
And it's interesting, sort of what you said of not having that mentality of what can this person do for me if I get, and just like that's not healthy. And like you said, sort of just having that of like, look at this wonderful network of people and support and community that I have around me, rather than like, okay, whose like favor card can I pull out? Like, well, that's like, people say like Hollywood's like gross and like sort of like smarmy and slimy and whatnot. It's like, well, let's not make it that way,
Yeah. We are Hollywood,
right?
where we are talking about ourselves. It is not some one entity that's controlling everything. Yeah, you have to sort of lead by example, and I think that's I think it's really important.
Yeah. And we always wrap up our interviews with in 10 words or less, what advice would you give to a young actor?
Get your freaking butt into some dang awesome acting classes. Yeah, that's exactly 10 words.
Awesome. Well, Adam, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us and for chatting about the issues. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, dude. Appreciate you. Have a good one.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to Actors with Issues on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and visit our YouTube channel for full video interviews. Actors with Issues is executive produced and hosted by Hawani Allah. See you next time.